Would you like to improve your writing for your university essays? Yeah, of course you would. So stick around, I'm going to give you some tips. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Attic. My name's Mark Jago. I'm doing a series of videos on how to improve your essay writing, focusing in on university level essays. I'm a philosopher, I teach in a philosophy department, so I'm taking my examples from philosophy essays, from philosophy ideas, but I think a lot of this stuff applies right across the board. In previous videos, we looked at answer the question and essay structure. These are super important things. In this video, we're going to take a look at principles of good writing, focusing in on clarity. If that stuff sounds good to you, why not subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to get updates? Okay, so we're going to talk about good writing style, but it's important to say there are loads of different ways in which writing can be good or bad. We're talking here about good writing for the purposes of a university essay, okay? So we're not talking about necessarily good literary style, colourful language, anything like that. What we're talking about is clear communication of ideas, sometimes quite complicated ideas. So the name of the game really is to communicate the concepts and your ideas, your evaluations of them as simply and as cleanly, as precisely as possible. So this is something that I think a lot of students find very difficult as they're making the transition to university study, particularly in a subject like philosophy where we don't have, data or much evidence to go by. It's really conceptual analysis and we're trying to convey quite difficult conceptual ideas. Often we have a clear idea of what it is going on in our heads. And it's the way we go from translating it from what's in our minds to what's down on paper that things get a little bit mushy, okay? So being able to explain the ideas that you have in your head clearly to somebody else, that's the name of the game. That's what we're going to look at today. Okay, so there are loads of different principles I could talk about here, but I'm just going to focus in on a few. I'm going to talk about writing clear, short sentences. I'm going to talk about arranging those sentences in a paragraph in a way that kind of lets the reader know exactly what's going on, and then placing each of those paragraphs in a logical order so that the reader can see the flow of your argument really easily and doesn't get lost as she goes on. Okay, so let's look at each of those in turn. One of the bits of advice I give to my students most often, probably second most often after answer the question, we talked about that a few videos back, is to use shorter sentences. This is one of the easiest, simplest, quickest ways of taking something that might be a little bit jumbled, a little bit hard to follow, and transforming it into something that's super clear. Basically, we're just going to take long sentences and we're going to break them down into a series of short sentences because that just makes it so much easier to follow. Let's take a look at an example. So here's a paragraph that I've written. It's something that I think I see a lot of in undergraduate essays, but I also see it in master's level, PhD level, even in published academics papers. It's the kind of thing that you would say to somebody out loud, right? So X's argument as set out in her paper, blah, 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 which tries to establish that whatever, by first arguing that blah, 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 is problematic because although it's logically valid, it has a false first premise, or at least it's hard to see why premise one would be true. Okay, maybe you could just about follow that. I was trying to make it a bit clearer by reading it out with kind of pauses and inflections to make it clear when I was moving on to a new point. And, I've heard people say things like this loads in talks, and it kind of works, said out loud. Down on paper, it's really hard to follow because you don't have all of those kind of inflections or pauses or whatever to help you out as a reader. Okay, all you've got is the language on the paper to help you as a reader. So as a writer, you have to help your readers out as much as you can. And one way to do that is you just take those long sentences and you split them down into shorter ones. So here's how we could rewrite that long sentence, like one whole paragraph as one sentence, into more manageable, more digestible series of sentences. Okay, so what is that paragraph trying to convey? Well, lots of different things. First of all, it's telling me about X's argument and what its conclusion is. Y. Then it's telling me the argument first argues for this other thing, Z. And then it's telling me that the argument is problematic. Why is it problematic? Well, because it's got a false first premise. So even though the argument is logically valid, the problem is it's got a false first premise. And then it has this kind of hedging bit which says, okay, well, maybe even if it's not false, it's hard to see why it will be true. Maybe you want to include that kind of thing, maybe you don't. All I'm doing here is I'm not going to change what's written, the content of it. I'm just going to change the way it is presented, basically by setting each of those points out as a different sentence. So first sentence, X's argument, and here I've put in, rather than saying which is presented in this paper, I've just put in a standard Harvard style reference. I'm going to talk about those in a different video, but basically you say author's name, year of the paper, then put the paper down in the bibliography. That's a really concise way of doing it. So X's argument, X 1980, tries to establish that Y, full stop. So there I'm just saying, we're talking about this argument, Y is the conclusion. It does so by first arguing that Z. Okay, so that's a really short sentence just saying, here's how the argument gets to its conclusion. The argument's logically valid, but it has a false first premise. So there's my evaluation of the argument. I'm telling you that I think it's problematic because it's got this false first premise. I could be even briefer there by forgetting the bit about it being logically valid and just tell you about the false premise. But I'm keeping the information the same as in the original. I'm just rejigging how it's presented. And then I've got this kind of parenthetical remark, this kind of hedging. Okay, maybe it's a bit too strong to say that it's definitely false, but we don't really have any reason to believe it. So I've put that in parentheses. Okay, but because it's kind of an additional point, I want it as a separate sentence. So we've gone there from one sentence as the whole paragraph to 1, 2, 3, 4. Have I counted that right? Yeah, 4 sentences. Each of them are pretty short. Okay, I haven't really reduced the word count. I haven't really made it more concise. It pretty much says exactly what it said before. I think it's easier to follow because it's expressed as a sequence of short sentences. So, okay, if you say everything in very short sentences, it starts to get a bit disjointed, starts to sound a bit weird, right? So, we don't have to make sure that every sentence is super short. Having lots of short sentences and then some longer ones, medium length ones, that's absolutely fine. What I'm basically saying is sentences like this one are hard to read, not just because they're long, but because they contain lots of different ideas. So the guiding principle here is kind of one idea per sentence. If we're going on to a new idea, or talking about the same idea but in a different way, let's put that in a different sentence. Okay, so writing in short sentences, or mostly short sentences, that is going to help, but it's not a kind of a surefire way of having really good, clear writing. For instance, let's look at these sentences from the beginning of Wittgenstein's Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. The world is everything that is the case. The world is the totality of facts, not of things. The world is determined by the facts, and by these being all the facts. Okay, so we're doing what I'm suggesting. We're writing in really short sentences. I still haven't got a clue what's going on there. We're going to look at how to avoid some of these problems in the next video. So there we're going to focus in on the kind of language that you choose to express your concepts, basically trying to keep it really simple and clear. So if you found this video useful, give it a thumbs up, that helps me out. Why not subscribe, hit the bell icon to get updates. I hope to see you back for the next one.